I'd like to talk about morality and geography tonight, and how considering environmental pathogens might very well reduce violent crime and even murder considerably more than any new law or policy or new prisons being built, and considerably cheaper, not only in real dollars, but in the cost of human suffering. Which sounds like a pretty good idea, doesn't it? Thank you, I thought you did great. Before we get to that, I'd like to try to define morality, which seems like a fairly simple question. What is morality? What is moral? Most people would answer very quickly and very confidently. It's being good. It's being generous and kind and patient and honest. What I like to sometimes call playing nice with others, but which I'm going to operationally define tonight as the golden rule, which is, as I'm sure you know, treating others as you would like to be treated. Now, it might not always seem like it, but I do believe that all humans and all human cultures are moral. They're all good in that they're all generous, and they're all kind, and they're all patient, and they're all honest. This is because humans are social. Humans are intensely social, which means that, by definition, we play nice with each other. Humans are also altricial, which means we give birth to children who are far too young to survive on their own. They need an enormous amount of nurturance for a very long period of time. So we not only have to be good that way and generous and kind, we have to like it, and most people do. Most people find being generous like that natural and rewarding. But to rise to the level of golden rule morality, it has to be more than just your own family. This is the conception of the history of moral development by David Lottie, who conceptualized it as larger and larger concentric circles encompassing more and more people. So in the middle, you see there, we have kin. We're generous and nice to kin, which is that altricial morality, which comes almost automatically, not only to humans, but all mammals. After that, we extend it to associates, which is not that uncommon in the animal world. Primates are quite good at this, as are humans. But as we get further and further out to become the fellow citizens, all of humanity, even non-human animals, there has to be some other explanation. And Lottie thinks that it relies on two things. One is the evolution of intelligence in humans, and the other, some geographical and environmental realities. So that's the motivation and the inspiration for the geography of morality. It's supported by what people call the axial age, which is a very unique time in human history. About 2,500 years ago or so, all of the golden rule moralities evolved almost simultaneously in three pretty distinct regions of the world. You see here the Eastern Mediterranean, the Ganges River Valley, and the Yellow Yangtze River valleys. Now, why would this have happened? Philosophers and theologians and historians have been puzzling over this for a very long time. There are a variety of explanations given. One was just a coincidence, which sometimes happens. Others, or they were waiting for the book to be written. When it finally was, people slapped their heads like it was a tomato juice commercial and thought, there it is. Why didn't I think of that? What a great idea. We're just going to get along. It makes perfect sense. And of course it does, but there was something else going on, something very unique that happened in those three regions for the first time in human history and no other place on Earth. It's something that probably doesn't seem to have much to do with morality. Those regions got very good at capturing energy. They captured 25,000 kilocalories per person per day, which means, it's a technical term for, they got very good at feeding themselves. 25,000 kilocalories per person per day is a lot. You only need about 2,500. So with the excess, they were able to feed livestock and store a fair amount of food, which meant that they didn't have to worry about possible famines or droughts, which happened periodically. Now, why would this encourage or even produce golden rule morality? There's a nascent morality in all people. We're good at least to our own children and then to our family and friends. But why would we extend it at that time? The explanation is we were now enjoying existential security for the first time in human history. So we no longer had to worry about where we're going to get our next meal. And in that vacuum, rushed in this idea that we can be good to other people. Now the test for this would be to look at a society that is already enjoying and embracing the golden rule morality, and if a significant existential threat arrives, should the golden rule go away? And according to this hypothesis, it will. It was the reverse of the axial age. This happens a lot of places, and it's happening in the United States today. To a greater or lesser degree, it happens around the world. But first, I'd like to give you a classic case study in the history of this. This is the Collect Pond in Lower Manhattan, late 18th century, very early 19th century. It was the single greatest source of drinking water for all the residents in Lower Manhattan. It was a spring-fed pond, which meant it was literally a giver of life. You didn't have to dig. You didn't have to dig for water. You didn't have to dig for wells. You didn't have to wait for the rain. You didn't have to wait for the snow to melt to refill this pond. It just sprung forward. But something very wrong went. Something very bad happened very quickly. A number of businesses that really polluted this lake very quickly went up around the pond. Tanneries, in particular tanneries and slaughterhouses, which used the water for their business, but they also used the pond for their dumpster, which very quickly turned the Collect Pond, that spring of life, into a fetid, stinking cesspool, which, without any kind of exaggeration, was a toxic waste site. They had to level that hill right there. It was the tallest hill in southern Manhattan to fill it in. It was so bad. It was beyond repair. But that was just the beginning of their problems. This is an outline of the Collect Pond and the neighborhood that was built on top of it. They called it Paradise Square. Now, the spring kept springing, as springs tend to do, and it compromised the foundations of these homes, and they started to subside. In addition to that, the water was pushing through. It was pushing out methane gas from the hastily covered organic material that was now rotting. This made life for the middle class who moved in there untenable. They moved out. It turned into the 5 Points, which was the first slum in America, and by all accounts at the time, the most violent and vice-ridden area on earth. Now, it was poor, as slums tend to be, and crime, and even violent crime and vice, is associated with poverty, but not to the degree that they saw in the 5 Points. Something else was going on. We think that something else was cholera. In addition to methane escaping from the former Collect Pond, cholera and dysentery and yellow fever were escaping, very likely done from the poisoning of the Collect Pond. Now, why would cholera cause people to be violent? The people on this slide are not suffering from cholera. It makes you very sick. It can kill you within one day. These people are not sick. These people are afraid. Cholera and other communicable diseases like this cause people to be afraid, mostly afraid of other people. This is explained with the behavioral immune system, which is essentially the immune system recognizes pathogens in the environment, and it generates a number of avoidant behaviors depending on the strength of the pathogens. These include, but are not limited to, disgust and ethnocentrism and xenophobia and preemptive violence in some cases. And the level of pathogens in the 5 Points was very, very high. So this reaction, these avoidant reactions, were very, very high. It turned people into what was the opposite of the golden rule. They didn't trust each other. They didn't like each other. The behavioral immune system can overgeneralize and think that people are causing it. It's actually cholera. It's very difficult to transmit from person to person. But the behavioral immune system isn't all that logical. It just makes you afraid of other people. It makes these larger circles smaller and smaller. Now, the golden rule eventually did return to New York, but not because of policy, not because of laws, not because of new prisons being built, and not because people went in and reminded the residents of the 5 Points that they should be good and nice to each other. There was a lot of crime and vice in the 5 Points, and everybody knew it. In fact, there were tours at the time to go and see the violence. But the violence was largely contained within the 5 Points, and it didn't spill out into the other neighborhoods, and no one was really worried about it. But it was a different story with cholera. Almost every cholera epidemic in Manhattan in the 19th century started in the 5 Points. This was a terrible health crisis. In addition to being a problem, just a problem of humanity, it was a considerable economic burden on the island, because every time there was an outbreak, people fled and banks closed, and you couldn't run a city like that. So they proposed and voted on and approved and funded a very ambitious engineering project. You see here, this was the Croton Aqueduct. It's about 50-something miles long from a lake what we used to call upstate, but I think that's maybe Ulster County, that brought water in to replace the contaminated water with clean water. The cholera epidemics stopped very soon afterwards, and the violence stopped right after that. So these things seem to be causal over and over again. Now, as I mentioned, these kinds of things are going on around the world today and in this country. The Ebola outbreak in West Africa and the cholera outbreak in Haiti quite recently caused a lot of death, certainly, but it also caused a spike in a certain kind of violence that they didn't see before then. These in-group, out-group violence. There's an enormous amount of distrust of other people, sort of the opposite of the golden rule. In fact, healthcare workers would go into some of these towns to try to help them, and they were met at the edge of the towns with machetes, and they were sometimes used on them. They really distrusted other people, and you couldn't reason with them. Of course, what you were trying to do is reason with the immune system, and it doesn't reason. It just gets very anxious, and it avoids anybody it doesn't recognize. This is also occurring in the United States. Now, we don't have cholera outbreaks in the United States anymore, and we don't have really 5 points kinds of neighborhoods. But some of our states have much, much higher pathogen loads than other states. And predictably, they have much, much higher levels of violence. I love Louisiana. I'm now a resident, but it so happens that Louisiana is in the highest pathogen prevalent region in the United States, and it has the highest murder rate. But Louisiana is not an immoral state. These things work on a very basic level in your autonomic nervous system, and it's generally outside of your conscious awareness. We're very quick to react to things we don't understand and don't like, and that happens here. So the theme of this talk is tomorrow shaping today. How does this help us shape tomorrow today? We know some of these cures or some of these approaches are really fairly straightforward. They're ambitious but straightforward. The technology for that aqueduct has been around since the Roman era. It's not expensive, but it's probably a lot cheaper than the level of violence, the level of human misery, and the jails that are built, and the lost wages, if you want to get cynical about it. There are all sorts of reasons to do this, to address pathogens. Now, aqueducts aren't the only way to deal with this, but we have tried to legislate morality before, and it doesn't really work that well. We are much, much more successful in dealing with pathogens. The immune system, as I've been saying, it doesn't care about cultural expectations. It just cares about survival, and if it detects pathogens, it reacts sometimes violently. This may seem a little fanciful, but I imagine a tomorrow where there's a much greater amount of cooperation and trust and golden rule type behavior. And that can be achieved, I believe, through the reduction of pathogens in the environment. At least that is an idea I believe is worth talking about. Thank you very much.